Hi guys, in this video we'll be going over how best to set up a studio or workspace environment if you don't have your own permanent studio space. A lot of people think that if they don't have a permanent studio or workspace environment, they're not going to be able to draw or get the most out of any drawing course. Well, with a few household items like furniture, books, boards and clamps, you can actually really get quite a lot done. And by looking at the schools and academies of the 19th century, we can see that often students had to improvise, like here at the Chase School of Art in New York. This student simply used a chair as her easel. And this student even ended up using an upturned chair as his canvas support. We can see in another example in this painting by Jefferson David Chalfont from the Académie Julian, which arguably was the most famous and successful academy of the 19th century, shows students at the front propping their drawing boards up against stools. So in this video, we'll be going over a few of the options available to you along with their pros and cons. And just by spending a small amount, you really can create a perfectly workable drawing environment. This is the most common way any beginner student would normally start a drawing. But this way of drawing has some fundamental problems when it comes to creating an accurate and successful piece of work. This setup is really much more suited to the act of writing, where you don't have to reference anything else in your vicinity, like for example your drawing subject or reference. So you only have to look at one area at the whole time. You're also only creating a series of small symbols and shapes that only have to relate to the symbols and shapes next to them, rather than relating greater distances like the top of the drawing to the bottom or the left of the drawing to the right. But because learning to draw will involve referencing the whole and studying the whole subject matter together, it is essential that you can study your subject or your reference directly and on the same plane for accurate results. Having your work in reference at a 90-degree angle like here or thereabouts from each other will make finding accurate proportion almost impossible. This is because the bottom of the drawing will be closer to you than the top, and if in, like this subject, the overall proportion is relatively tall, the bottom will appear out of proportion to the top when viewing the work parallel to your eyes. Any kind of measurement to compare the subject to your drawing would almost be impossible due to the difference in perspective. And as you can see, in order to see the whole picture, you are forced to lean back. But again, this changes the angle at which you are viewing your work. As such, it is never certain the work is going to be correct. It's also important to remember that our visual memory is very short. So as you can see, if you are having to constantly change your view without being able to see your drawing and the subject matter at the same time, as well as not being able to see the subject matter on the same plane and perspective, finding your mistakes will become almost impossible. This problem becomes even clearer when using this drawing setup in a simple box as our subject matter, as even though the box that has been drawn and the reference has the same proportion and is exactly the same size, by looking at the drawing from such an angle, the bottom of the box clearly seemed wider than the top. And by placing the drawing and the reference next to each other on exactly the same plane, we can see they are in fact exactly the same size, which really shows the influence perspective can play in proportion. An extreme example of perspective and how it affects a subject is the painting The Ambassadors by Hans Holbein the Younger, where if you were to look at the painting straight on, you would be confronted with a masterpiece of 16th century portraiture, with the addition of a strange diagonal stripe running across the bottom. But by viewing the painting from an extreme angle, the stripe transforms and clearly becomes a skull. While this is extreme, even subtle perspective changes, especially when drawing figurative art, becomes apparent. This setup for drawing also causes material problems. Because of the necessity of having to rest your hand on the paper, you're more than likely to smudge your work. It also means you're pressing down with the full force of the pencil point, and so rubbing out your mistakes will become even harder. And on top of this, due to the fact that pencils for drawing are sharpened to a long tapered point, as opposed to pencils for writing that have a shorter, more standard point, it is very likely you will end up snapping the pencil. It is also important to remember that this setup won't allow you to draw from the shoulder in order to create long straight lines that are needed at the beginning of a drawing for accurate proportions. So the simplest and most cost-effective solution for this, and the majority of problems, is to invest in a good table easel. There are hundreds of makes and styles of table easels on the market, but it is important, like any good art equipment, to buy a good quality easel. Look for an easel that's made from good quality wood, which will avoid warping over time, and one that has a sliding mechanism like this one that uses nuts and bolts to hold the easel upright. Avoid using easels that have slots at fixed positions to adjust the angle of the easel. One, these don't give enough structural support, and so the easel will often slip, normally midway through a drawing. And secondly, they never allow the easel to stand fully straight, to remove the problem of perspective. As you can see, having a good quality table easel will allow you to reference both your drawing and your subject instantly, without having to move your head. This means mistakes are easier to see, and so more accurate drawings can be made. As the course progresses, you will tackle more complex subjects, and you will start to use measuring tools. Another advantage of using an easel is that with your drawing and the subject next to each other, accurate measurements can be taken using these tools. It is also important that the drawing is secured on the easel and not loose. So make sure that if you're using a pad, the backing is thick enough not to bend when tightly secured to the easel. Investing in a small A3 drawing board is advisable to give a good, solid surface to work on. If you find that the easel is moving back when you're drawing, either try placing a book or another heavy item on the base to stop this from happening. As well as these table easels, both Maybeth and Winsor & Newton have a range of easels that allow for the support to be dropped in front of the table, giving your arm much greater freedom of movement without the table getting in the way. Another option in place of an easel is to use a chair, as seen in the photographs of the Chase School of Art. This is really simple, as all you need is a drawing board, a few clamps or clips, and of course a chair. The advantage of this setup is the fact that it can be completely packed away. The disadvantage is the fact to get the correct viewing angle so your eyes are level with the drawing in order to remove any problem with perspective, the drawing board would have to be quite tall. Also, in order for the drawing board to remain stable, it has to remain at a slight angle on the chair rather than ideally at a perfect vertical. Of course, if space isn't an issue, you really shouldn't look any further than a studio easel. The two most common variations are the radial easel and the H-frame easel. And whilst the radial easel is a lot cheaper, or at least can be, than a H-frame easel, it relies on one central bolt as its support. And after continued use, this will start to wear down and become looser over time, meaning the easel might slowly lean forwards or backwards. Whereas the H-frame easel provides 2 points of support and will survive decades of hard work. even in the most demanding studios.